Pretty much John Calvin is one of the Protestants that I was mentioning, but he also was trying to go back to an older tradition of a church father named Augustine. And really what it's about is predestination. In the New Testament, Paul talks about God planning and doing things like he had already predestined things to happen. And we really have no say in what happens. And so I'm trying to paint it in a way that's simple for layman's terms, but in Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 9, he describes it saying, before Jacob and Esau were even born, so that God's purpose of election would stand, he said, the older shall serve the younger. Jacob I loved, Esau I hated. So God chose Jacob, but he hated Esau. And I looked at that and went, God loves everyone. I was taught that God loves everyone. He can't hate people. But several places in the Bible, it says that God hates people. He hated Esau. Psalms 5:5 says that God hates the workers of iniquity. He hates not just their iniquity, he hates the workers of iniquity. That's why people are thrown in hell. So it started making sense to me. Well, the only people you're going to burn are people you hate. You wouldn't do that if you loved them.
Yeah.
I was trying to make sense of my worldview. Like it never made sense. God loves people. He'll cook them forever. I couldn't make sense of it. Well, I couldn't swallow that pill either. After a while, I realized, you mean to tell me some of my loved ones who'd not taken Jesus seriously, I love them more than God? And he goes deep. But I go through this college and I relapsed again. I had my wisdom teeth pulled. They put me on opiates. Off to the races I go for another year or whatever on opiates. And then I get clean again. Back on Jesus. But as around this time, I start to investigate eschatology, which is the study of last things. I mentioned this before to you, that Jesus said some stuff in the Gospels about when some things were going to happen, the end of history, the end of the world, that kind of thing, that they were going to happen in his lifetime. The majority of all Christianity agrees that Jesus is going to change the world in the future. They're waiting for the world to be changed. I wanted Jesus to be right because I believed in him. My experience told me so. And he said that this stuff was going to happen back then. He's not a liar. So it had to have happened back then, but it had to happen in a way that we just missed it. And that is called full preterism. It's a whole different group. Well, I got in big trouble. I got in real big trouble for believing in this position. And my Presbyterian PCA Calvinist church, they would visit our house if we weren't there on a Sunday and knock on our door and say, why weren't you here on the Sabbath, which is actually a Saturday? They called Sunday Sabbath. Mm-hmm. They were like that serious. And they were like, why didn't you show up? Which is very cult mentality, to show up to people's houses and wonder why they're not at church. Well, I get in trouble and they call me in one day after church to have 5 elders in the church sit down. It felt like a court. And I was sitting at the seat. They told me not to speak, but remain silent. And they were rebuking me, all 5 of them correcting me for the heresy of full preterism, the teaching that Jesus came back in 70 AD with the temple's destruction in the 1st century. That is a heresy and you should not be teaching it. You need to change and get back in line with the true teachings of Jesus and the New Testament.
Oh, wow.
They would not let me speak. Yeah.
They actually have that in Mormonism, the excommunication, the trial, where you go in with all these different men sitting there and telling you, you did all these things wrong. What do you have to say for yourself? Although they do let you speak for like 20 minutes. But they already pretty much know what they're going to say, which is, well, you're excommunicated anyway. See you in a year.
It's crazy because I felt so attacked, like how you felt when the bishop was correcting you and rebuking you. I felt so uncomfortable that I realized this wasn't my home. I needed to find my home. I thought that it was my home, but it wasn't. So I left and I relapsed again. And I relapsed on opiates. And I'm going to skip ahead and just say, when I finally was excommunicated and I stopped putting myself in an organizational religion, like a particular church, I had the freedom to explore things that I never did. And I started understanding there's a way to understand, while I was a full preterist, different interpretations of things. Can I give you one example?
Yes, please.
Do you know the story of Samson, the strongest man who ever lived?
No, but I would love it if you told me.
So Samson had 7 locks of hair. He was an Israelite who had a thing for Philistine women. Long story short, he ends up in love with this Philistine woman named Delilah. If you ever hear someone call you Delilah, just know they're trying to be derogative.
Oh.
Delilah was trying for the Philistine men to find out the weakness of Samson, because Samson was like invincible. He was the strongest man who ever lived. His 7 locks of hair get cut off finally by the 3rd try. And when she found out his weakness was if you cut his hair, he'll lose his strength. They cut his hair, they gouge his eyeballs out of his head with hot irons, and then he's grinding milk. Oh yeah, the story's pretty gruesome, but I won't get you into all the details. But if you take that literal, you can read that literal. There was another way to understand it though. Samson, the word in Hebrew is little son. And so I started realizing, oh my gosh, I found a teaching by a Freemason actually, who went to explain that Samson means the sun, and his 7 locks of hair are the rays, the rays of the sun. And if you cut the light of the sun off, darkness, the sun loses its strength. And so Delilah in the story gets paid in silver. Silver is a symbol for the moon. And the sun and the moon have a love-hate kind of relationship. Throughout all mythology, you'll find that the moon is usually the female and the sun is usually the male, and they have a love-hate relationship. Well, I found this interpretation to be quite convincing because in the story, one of the places, Samson ties a fox's tails together and puts it in the field, and it scorches the entire field. Take that literal if you want, but we know that a hot summer sun can literally catch fire fields in the summertime. And so I'm starting to realize maybe there's symbolism in the Bible and not everything's literal. That led me down a path that really helped me land my airplane of deconverting, because I realized, what's the truth? There's so many different views and so many positions on this. How do I know what the truth is from the Bible? And from my dying from addiction and heroin, I wanted to understand what was wrong with me. I thought I was insane. I kept going back and forth between addiction to drugs or alcohol, and then back on Jesus, or back in the gym wanting to do testosterone to get, my pump on and stuff and be all big and strong. I thought I was nuts. I didn't know what was wrong with me. The church told me I had a spiritual problem, that you need to get right with God, or it's demons or devils, or you need this or that. But the other side said this is a disease and that there is a solution to you, but you have there are problems. Your frontal lobar cortex and your midbrain are not shooting the neurons properly. The signals aren't right. Your behavior, the kind of patterns you've lived your life in, aren't right. There are so many things. I don't even know how to get this story fully out to you without exhausting these things. I ended up stealing for my addiction and got a felony charge. I had stolen from my parents. I gave a testimony on YouTube 10, 12 years ago when I got clean one of the times. And I was telling a church how I was saved and how I was this bad guy, but God saved me. And it was only Jesus Christ, the whole nine, on and on and on. Now I started seeing, wow, I found myself. Like I finally found myself, and it was me the whole time. Almost like, do you remember Interstellar? Did you ever watch that movie with Matthew McConaughey? You remember when they go through the wormhole and there's somebody touching them, and then at the end his daughter's talking to the ghost, and it was him the whole time?
Yeah.
That's how I feel my story was. At the end, when I realized this was all a phantom, a mirage, I thought this was true. It was you, Derek. It was you all along. You had what it took. It was the loved ones around you that helped you to overcome addiction.
Yeah.
And I kept putting the tail on the donkey, the right Christianity. Not one of these is true because I had that real experience.
Yeah.